the year. Next, I'll present the biennial JLARC Impacts Report. The Auditor of Public Accounts and her staff will present their work plan for the coming fiscal year. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, the Auditor of Public Accounts is bringing forward a proposed matter for your consideration, which is a move from the Monroe Building to new office space. Mr. Chairman, before we begin the work plan presentation, I'd like to introduce our newest staff member. Her name is Alex Jansen, who joined the staff in January of this year.
Well, welcome.
Prior to coming to JLARC, she served in Virginia State Government, first as a program manager at the Office of State Medical Examiner, and then as a senior policy analyst at the Department of Health. Alex is serving as our principal analyst for ongoing oversight.
Terrific.
Mr. Chairman,
I hope they're treating you okay over there on your first weeks. Okay. All right, good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, now to the presentation of the JLARC work plan. You may recall that it's typical practice to present the work plan at the May meeting of JLARC each year to give the Commission an understanding of the work that we're undertaking in the current year on the studies that have been directed. This meeting also serves as an opportunity for members of the Commission to provide input on issues that you believe are especially important for us to address in conducting our research, as well as to ask any questions that you have of us about the studies. With the exception of the study on the effects of gun violence, which was directed by a joint resolution, the studies that we're currently conducting were directed by this Commission. The Associate Directors will give you a brief overview of the studies under their supervision, and then the project leaders for each study will provide you with a brief summary of their studies. We'll also share with you the ongoing oversight that we'll be undertaking this year. First up is Justin Brown. Justin?
Good morning, Justin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the Commission. As Al said, my name is Justin Brown. I'm one of the Associate Directors at JLARC, and I have 4 projects this year that I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to speak about the first 2, and I'm going to turn it over to the project leaders to speak about the second 2 listed there. The first project is information about books that have been removed recently from school libraries. As you can see from the slide, we're shooting to present the results to you at the July JLARC meeting. Those of you on rules may remember that both the House and Senate agreed to direct us to survey school divisions, and Senator Locke and Delegate Simon actually were the original patrons of this resolution. State resolution is rather prescriptive in terms of what we should ask of divisions. The overall focus is on which books have been removed since 2020, who was involved in the decision to remove the books, and what the basis for the removal was. There's a few other small things that we're asking about as well. We are, in terms of our research activities, we're interviewing some of the major statewide K-12 groups, including the Virginia Association of School Librarians. We've decided to partner with the VCU Survey Research Group on this, and the survey is actually out right now with school divisions. And it's a fairly straightforward project, but I'll pause here if there's any questions before I move to the next one.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
We are also reviewing demographic trends in Virginia. And as you can see from the slide, we're shooting to have this for you at the November JLARC meeting. This was a commission study resolution last fall, and you can see the specific topics in the resolution listed here on the slide. Broadly speaking, demographics is really about population trends and characteristics of the population. The resolution directs us to look at both historical and projected demographic trends and characteristics. Then we'll identify some of the impacts of those trends that could, some of the impacts that could have on state revenue, different government functions. And part of the idea was maybe some ideas for potential future JLARC work will come up through this in terms of, is a particular agency kind of aware of and prepared to adapt to some of the demographic trends in place. We're partnering with the Weldon Cooper Center on this because of its demographic expertise. Our methodologists will analyze the demographic data to identify those trends, and then based on those trends, as I mentioned, we'll look for examples of those potential trends in terms of the impact, and we're going to try to reach out to some state agencies by interviewing them. And as I said, we'll report this in November. I'll pause here if there's any questions on that.
Hearing none.
So, Mr. Chairman, we'll keep it rolling. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Papps to talk to you about our community college review.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. In November of 2024, the Commission approved a resolution directing staff to conduct a review of the Virginia Community College system and how it's adjusting to the changing landscape for higher education. We plan to brief this study to you in October. Slide 10 summarizes the variety of issues that the resolution directed us to address as part of this study. As a bit of background, there are a variety of changes occurring in the landscape for higher education that all have the potential to impact the community colleges. One of those changes is that the number of high school graduates peaked this year and will start to decline in future years, which could lead to a smaller pool of potential students. Another change is that attitudes towards higher education are changing, with potential students increasingly questioning the value of a college degree. At the same time, though, there's growing student interest in technical and vocational focused training that directly translates to a job and can be earned at Virginia's community colleges. Finally, the pandemic changed expectations about how instruction should be delivered. In the 2023-24 school year, over 70% of VCCS's students were taking at least some of their classes online. Against this backdrop, Virginia's community colleges have been experiencing enrollment declines, with enrollment declining by about 27% over the past decade. However, in the past year or so, enrollment appears to be stabilizing. The system's enrollment losses over the past decade have been mitigated by dual enrollment, which has been growing. When dual enrollment students are included in the system's enrollment declined by about 16%. This next slide dissects those enrollment changes a little bit further. Dual enrollment students have increased by about 58% over the past decade, so that's a gain of about 20,000 students just in dual enrollment. At the same time, academic transfer students have declined by 33%, and these declines continued even after the pandemic. Finally, enrollment of career and technical education students, which includes the fast-forward students, has declined by 15%, but most of that decline happened before the pandemic. Since 2021, enrollment for CTE students has grown by almost 9,000 students. Slide 14 lists the major questions we plan to address in this study. How well is the VCCS adapting to a changing landscape for higher education? What are the outcomes and potential barriers to completion of students seeking to transfer to a four-year institution from a community college? Do career and technical education students have positive outcomes, and are programs aligned with employer demand? Are dual enrollment programs consistently available to eligible high school students, and what challenges need to be addressed to increase availability? Mr. Chairman, slide 15 lists the research activities we're planning for this study, which include reviewing literature and other states' experiences on adapting to the changing landscape, interviewing staff at the community colleges, system office, and local school divisions, collecting data from local school divisions about dual enrollment, analyzing data on college enrollment, student completion and outcomes, and alignment of CTE courses with high-demand jobs, and site visits to selected colleges. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take any questions.
You know, one thing that occurs to me is that the capital program and in the system, sometimes I think they're trying to fund that through regular appropriations, or maybe that's heavy maintenance. Are you going to look into that at all? Because they haven't been requesting capital projects, to my knowledge. Am I right about that?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's something we may look at a little bit in terms of just the sustainability and how that's impacting sustainability. But there is another study that we're conducting of the capital assets process that Lauren's going to brief to you in a few minutes.
Okay. So, I mean, there's a concern that some funds that we're sending for academic programs are being used for that instead, but I guess someone will be looking into that.
Yeah, Lauren Axel is leading up a review of the capital asset process, and so that's useful information. I think we can maybe look for that across the two studies, maybe.
We can.
So that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. There's one last thing. There seems to be some kind of disagreement or misunderstanding is probably better about what their current money. There's $125 million in their bank account right now. Okay. You know, not being moved forward with, and how we're gonna proceed with that, and what flexibility the system has to spend that money. Okay. And how it's allocated. So anyway, just a few things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On slide 11, your first, your first bullet point there, number of high school high school graduates peaked this year and will decline in future years. Is that based on total number of high school students? I mean, are you looking at eventually what's going to be like a percentage? Same number of kids going to go to school, just less are graduating, or there's less going to school?
So this bullet point, Delegate, is referring to the total number of high school just graduating from all high schools in Virginia, and isn't so much looking at whether a greater proportion may be going to college in the future. It's just the pool of students that are sort of in that traditional college age will start to shrink starting this year.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, Delegate Wilt, it's interesting. I was talking earlier about that review of the demographic trends. One thing that has kind of happened after the Great Recession, you have fewer people getting married and fewer people having kids. So there's just fewer children, and this is a national phenomenon, of the age that they graduate from high school. And then to Stephanie's point, there may be a smaller percentage of those smaller number of students who may choose to go to higher education. So it could play out at a couple different levels in terms of implications for higher ed. But it's tough to do anything about that, frankly.
Delegate Wilt,
Have to adapt to it.
You have a follow-up? Yeah. Delegate Wilt? Oh, you don't? Okay. My friend Delegate Ware here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Pabst, one of the things that impressionistically appears to me that there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen of decision-making for the community college system. Who decides where to go from a curricular standpoint and so on? Will you be looking at, and I'm not sure it's governance as much as the variety of stakeholders or perceived stakeholders that are involved in the decision-making as they go forward?
Delegate Ware, that's a really good question, and I think where we were planning to look at is in terms of their sustainability. We were going to look at what their mission is and whether it's really aligning with what is sort of in statute and law about what the community college systems are supposed to be doing. But in terms of the number of stakeholders that are out there and sort of having some role in the governance, I think that's something we could look at a little bit, but but it would all kind of connect back to the sustainability and how that's affecting the community college's sustainability.
Mr. Brown,
Thank you.
You have a follow-up on that? Okay. Are there any more questions? Okay, thank you. Good luck.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll hand it over to Joe McMahon, who's leading the study of the state's new K-12 accountability framework.
Oh, terrific. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Thank you, Stephanie. As she said, Joe McMahon, I'll be the project leader for JLARC's review of Virginia's K-12 school accountability framework. Working with me on this project are Kate Hopkins and Laura White, and we'll be briefing in December. The study resolution directs us to review Virginia's recently revised accreditation standards for public K-12 education, which I'll be referring to as the accountability system or framework. You can see the topics that we'll be reviewing here. For some quick background, the Virginia Board of Education passed regulations establishing a new public school accountability framework this past fall. There were several goals cited by the board when making the changes. The two most commonly cited were to increase transparency of the state's accountability system and to establish a new system that sets higher standards for schools and students. The framework is now in place and will measure school performance for this current 2024-25 school year. The first official results produced by the new system will be released in the fall of this year. We'll be incorporating those results into our December report. So it's going to be really important to have those official results because they will represent actual ratings that schools will receive, and they'll be the most up-to-date and accurate insight into how the model works. So the Federal Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, requires states to develop and implement a school accountability system. That system must have certain measures of school performance, but states are given flexibility to include other measures and for deciding how to score and weight them. So what you see here is a really simplified version of what that looks like for Virginia's new framework. The system is broken into 4 main measures or components, and you can see those across the bottom of the slide. They're mastery, growth, readiness, and graduation. And then most of those components are comprised of a grouping of several smaller measures called indicators. So for example, that mastery component is a measure of student proficiency. It's made up of 4 indicators of student achievement, including performance on reading, math, and science SOLs, as well as English language learners' progress towards proficiency. And then Virginia's framework uses slightly different indicators and weightings for each of the 3 levels of schools, elementary, middle, and high. So schools will be scored based on student performance on each of the framework's indicators. Those indicator scores are then totaled and weighted to produce a single summative score for every school in the state. The summative score corresponds with one of 4 label designations, which are assigned to each school. The labels are distinguished, on track, off track, and needs intensive support. Schools in the 2 lowest categories will be those that are likely to be targeted for additional state support from VDOE. Our key study issues are to look at the following questions. What is the purpose of an accountability system and how should it be designed? Are the indicators used in Virginia's framework appropriate for measuring school performance? Is the framework based on a sound methodology? Is the framework being effectively implemented? Are results presented in a fair and useful way? And does it look like the framework will effectively link schools needing support with meaningful assistance? Finally, here's a look at our research activities. Some notable ones will be comparing Virginia's framework to K-12 accountability systems in other states. We'll interview experts in school accountability, members of the State Board of Education, and school staff. We'll survey school division leadership, and there will be extensive data analysis to examine the framework's methodology, including how it measures, scores, and weights student performance. So that concludes my overview of our study, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, there's got to be questions on this. Okay, I don't see any hands. Nobody. Delegate Tata, you don't have anything? Good morning. Hope your drive from the beach was good. Okay, good. Okay, I mean, this is the most controversial thing in the Commonwealth. It's in the newspapers all the time. People get mad. They quit the board. You know, fingers are pointed, and we don't have any questions. We're just going to wait. We're just going to wait for the outcome. Okay, all right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me off the hook. I'll turn it over to Tracy for her slate of studies.
Two quick announcements. The first announcement is I am not Tracy Smith. I'm Justin Brown. Tracy can't be with us this morning. She had a family emergency, so I'll cover this. But the second announcement is it's been pointed out to me that the screens aren't working in the first row. If you would like to move back, there's some seats available. You don't have to, but feel free to do that because they are working in the second row. If you can see mine, okay, that's great. So as I said, Tracy can't be with us this morning, but she's supervising 4 studies. And first we'll start off with the study resolution to look at potentially moving the Department of Juvenile Justice into the HHR Secretariat. So the project leader for that has been Brittany Utz, and I'll ask her to come up and talk to you about that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Brittany Utz, and I am the lead analyst for our study examining the potential transfer of the Department of Juvenile Justice to the Health and Human Resources Secretariat. Tess Hintrager is working with me on this study with a planned briefing date next month at our June meeting. This study arose as a Commission resolution that was approved in 2023, in which we were directed to look at the feasibility, costs, and benefits of transferring the responsibility for DJJ from the Secretary of Public Safety to the Secretary of HHR. To provide some background, DJJ is currently one of 10 agencies within the Public Safety Secretariat, and its mission is to protect the public by preparing court-involved and committed youth to become successful citizens. DJJ began a transformation effort in 2016 to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the juvenile justice system. And as part of that effort, DJJ has modified much of its programming with the goal of better balancing punishment and rehabilitation. About 3,000 youth are involved in the juvenile justice system at any given time, and many of these youth are eligible for services delivered by agencies in the HHR Secretariat, including CSA services, foster care, and self-sufficiency programs. The issues the team is examining as part of this study include looking at how transferring DJJ to the HHR Secretariat would affect youth and their families, public safety, DJJ's ability to collaborate with both criminal justice and HHR agencies and programs, and state and local costs. Slide 28 shows the research activities the team has undertaken for this study, including interviews with various state agencies, subject matter experts, and stakeholders, reviews of agency structures in other states, a review of literature on organizational management and juvenile justice best practices, and an analysis of agency budget and expenditure data. I will pause there in case there are any questions about this study.
Could you give a little bit more detail on how CSA is involved in this study?
Yes, Delegate, Mr. Chairman, CSA is involved to some extent in the juvenile justice system, particularly for youth who are in foster care or at risk of being placed in foster care. And so youth either prior to entering the juvenile justice system may already have been involved in CSA, or DJJ staff, as part of setting up what services youth are going to receive, will coordinate with CSA if that's the best method for ensuring youth get access to those services.
Any other questions here?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
It seems like this is all focused from the services direction and none of the public safety side. So where are the Commonwealth's attorneys involved in this side of the ledger? Because certainly if somebody comes into the system through a CHIN's supervision or support, I get that. But if somebody enters the system because they committed a malicious wounding or murder, they may not have come in through a CSA direction. So I just want to make sure we don't forget that side of the ledger.
Yes, Senator McDougall, that's a good question. We did a focus group with Commonwealth's attorneys to get their perspectives. And we also, in kind of making the calculus for what secretariat is the best placement for DJJ, we kind of examined all the pros and cons. And so we interviewed staff and leadership at public safety agencies as well as staff and leadership at the HHR agencies to understand both sides of the ledger and make sure we're balancing that appropriately in this consideration.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator,
one additional question. We do have a lot of regional facilities that are used when inmates can't be released back into the community and there's a criminal action. Did y'all communicate with those as well?
We did speak with the Juvenile Detention Center Association, and so we did get some of their perspectives. There are also some youth who are in DJJ custody who are placed in JDCs and community placement programs. So we've talked to both DJJ staff and the detention center staff to get a sense for that overlap and how that works.
Follow up? Okay. Anybody? Well, this is going to be an interesting study. So but people that hope that it would be moved, what would outcome would reinforce their point of view?
Well, I don't want to spoil the findings for the briefing next month. But
someone had this idea to study this, and I just want to be reminded why.
Sure. Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think the advocacy groups who were proponents for this study, I think their goal would be that they think that youth who are involved in the juvenile justice system could potentially be getting better access to rehabilitative services and programs that are offered through the HHR Secretariat. And so just ensuring that coordination is happening between DJJ and the HHR agencies is the goal of looking at this.
Perfect, thank you. That's just what I wanted to know. Anybody else here have a question? Yeah, Senator, Delegate Simon.
You guys also looking, I guess, at potential negative unintended consequences? I mean, so are we concerned that more juveniles would then maybe be transferred to the adult system? I was thinking about Senator McDougall's problem. Somebody comes in through the criminal side, do Commonwealth's attorneys, are they more likely, if they're worried that HHS and HHR are going to be, won't be the appropriate place to handle them, are they more likely to try them as adults or seek to try, petition to try them as adults? Have you looked at those, again, potential negative unintended or maybe intended consequences?
Yes, Delegate Simon, that's a really good point. That is something that we've looked at, is kind of sort of the more obvious advantages and disadvantages, but then also kind of uncovering any potential unintended consequences that would be important to consider in making this decision. So we'll have more information on that for you next month.
It's a good teaser. I'll be sure to be here.
Yeah, really trying to make sure everyone comes next month to hear all of our exciting findings.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much, Brittany.
Thank you. See you next month.
Good luck. Yeah.
I will now turn things over to Lauren Axel.
Good morning, Ms. Axel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. As Brittany said, I'm Lauren Axel, and I'll be leading JLARC's review of capital construction and maintenance. We plan to share our findings with you for this study in October. Our study resolution directs us to review the state's approach to identifying needs, prioritizing, planning, and funding capital assets at its state agencies and public higher education institutions. The study will cover the way these entities maintain existing capital assets as well as new construction. As part of this study, we will look at the availability and usability of data on state capital asset condition and utilization and the timeliness of capital outlay projects. We will also look at the role of state entities like Six-Pack, DGS, and SCHEV in capital policies and processes. To give you a bit of background, the state currently owns about 7,600 buildings that total over 128 million square feet. Public higher education institutions own about 41% of that and nearly 3/4 of the square footage. DGS manages most of the state-owned buildings and systems in Capitol Square, but about 60 state agencies and public higher education institutions manage their own. The state has invested heavily in capital assets over the past decade. The state-owned buildings and systems still have significant maintenance needs. There are 4 main study issues that our team will focus on as part of this study, which include identifying the capital assets the state owns, their condition, and the extent they are used, assessing how agencies and higher eds are identifying and planning for future capital needs, determining if the state's policies and processes effectively identify, fund, and complete maintenance reserve and capital outlay projects, and finally, identifying whether capital outlay projects experience avoidable delays and potential fixes for those. This slide shows the various research activities we will complete for this study. We will analyze several different types of data on capital assets, maintenance reserve funding and spending, and capital outlay project timeliness. We will interview a variety of state entities and subject matter experts from national organizations, other states, and the federal government. And we will review the state's current capital asset policies and a sample of capital project documents. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lauren, if we could go back to the first slide that you had up there of some of the decision makers in this, I come back to a similar point, and that is Six-Pack, DGS, and SCHEV. And I'm thinking in terms of the decision makers. Six-Pack is something that I've recently had some experience with, and I guess my interest again would be, who are the folks who make these decisions? Is it money committee staff? Is it the governor's? Which roles in the governor, and how does that matrix evolve in the decision making?
Delegate Ware, thank you. That is something that we do plan to look at, the decision makers that are involved and what exactly their roles are. As part of Six-Pack, that does include the Secretary of Finance and staff directors of Money Committee staff. We will be working closely with those folks as well as DGS, SCHEV, really making sure that we get a variety of perspectives so that we can fully understand who's making what decisions, how the processes work, and how that really translates into the projects and their successfulness.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. So in the report, we heard earlier in a presentation about higher education population, and does that have a place in this study, taking into consideration? I mean, I see where you're going with the projects, but potentially it seems like there might be a conclusion drawn in some form or fashion somewhere along on some project. We don't need it because we don't have the student. See where I'm going? Does that play into?
Yes, Delegate Wilt, that's a really important point, and one reason that we will be looking at what data the state currently has on utilization of existing capital assets, especially at the higher eds. We know there is a little bit of data on that, so we look forward to reviewing it. And then we'll be asking folks at the higher ed institutions how they go about planning for and prioritizing which projects they choose to do, whether that's supporting existing capital maintenance needs or trying for new construction.
You have a follow-up? Delegate Wilt? You're good. Okay, you're good. Okay.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to Drew Dickinson to talk about the next study.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Drew Dickinson, and I'm leading our review of correctional education and vocational programs this year. We plan to brief the results of the study to you in November. The study comes from a commission resolution that was approved last November. The resolution directs us to inventory the current education and vocational training programs at each state correctional institution, to evaluate their availability and their alignment with labor market needs, to compare DOC's programs to evidence-based practices, and to evaluate the outcomes of program participants. It also directs us to evaluate the feasibility and potential effectiveness of providing education and vocational training programs in local and regional jails. And to provide some background, as of last October, there were about 26,000 state responsible inmates, most of whom were in one of 37 DOC-operated prison facilities. State law requires DOC to establish and maintain academic and career and technical education programs for inmates. DOC does this through adult education classes, CTE classes, and post-secondary degree programs at its prison facilities. While all facilities provide adult education classes, their actual availability depends on staffing and security constraints. CTE and post-secondary education programs are not available at all facilities for various reasons, and among those facilities that have them, there tend to be wait lists. Consistent employment after release is associated with reduced recidivism, a pattern seen both nationally and in available data in Virginia. National research also indicates that correctional education and vocational training programs, if they are designed and implemented well, can help prepare individuals for employment after release. As part of our study, we'll be focusing on the following questions. What education and vocational programs are available at DOC facilities? What proportion of eligible inmates enroll in and complete those programs, and what prevents enrollment and completion? Are DOC's policies, procedures, staffing, and oversight of education programs sufficient to ensure that they're effective? Do educational programs prepare inmates for skills that are needed in the labor market? And what prevents DOC from modifying or expanding its program offerings? We'll also be examining whether participants in these programs obtain and sustain employment after their release, and asking what educational programs are provided in local and regional jails, and whether it's feasible and advantageous to expand them to more jails and jail inmates. The next two slides summarize some of our planned research activities. These include analyses of program participation, completion, and employment outcomes, surveys of DOC staff and local and regional jail superintendents, interviews with DOC staff and national subject matter experts, reviews of correctional education programs in other states and national best practices, and finally, site visits to DOC prison facilities. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared remarks, but I'd be happy to take any questions at this point.
Thank you. What programs in the facilities have a wait list, and do they coincide with needs in the marketplace for jobs?
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the question. We are actively collecting that information to make sure that we're able to provide it. I do know that most types of programs do have a wait list at most facilities, and so it's adult education classes, your CTE classes that range from welding, plumbing, electrical work, and so what we will have for you is a concrete numbers on what the wait lists look like. Who's never getting off the wait list, I think, is an important question. And so matching that with is there demand in the facility with demand outside? And that seems like a pretty good place where would say if you're seeing good outcomes from those programs, a place where you'd probably want to invest or reallocate funding to. So.
Okay, terrific. Delegate Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This study will not include juvenile detention, or does it?
Delegate Herring, this study does not include the juvenile detention centers. It does the jails. This is focusing on adult correctional programs. So
Okay.
we did, back in 2022, look at the juvenile detention center programs and things like that, though.
Okay.
Follow up? Okay, Delegate Simon, you can
No,
come back
not
to
now, but we'll.
Mr. Chair, my question would be, as far as the research activities, maybe a suggestion more than a question is, if there's an opportunity to reach out to some of the prisoner advocacy groups that exist there. It seems like you're pretty heavy on DOC staff, and I'm sure that they want to give you complete and candid information, but sometimes we get, as Chairman of the Public Safety Committee, we hear stories that suggest that but the staff's perception of what's happening is different from some of the family members and other of the advocacy groups. So if they could be surveyed as well, I think that'd probably be useful. And to the extent you guys can work with the new ombudsman's office, I guess, to help gather some of this information, I think that would be valuable. And then I guess another question would be whether access to the educational programs is used, or lack of access is used as a form of discipline. That's one of the things that we've heard about from a number of the inmates, is that they want to get on an improvement program, but one of the first things they lose if they misbehave at all is they lose access to the educational and technical program. So that's something you guys could make part of the study. That would be useful, I think, to get some feedback on that.
Delegate Simon, it's definitely on our radar. Advocacy groups, we just had a very helpful conversation last week with a large advocacy group, and so that is definitely on our radar. Point is well taken. And then access, whether it's used as discipline, definitely have some commentary on that. And there's some statutory provisions that say that it can be used as an incentive for if you're participating in it, you can achieve these benefits. But yeah, we can also look at how that actually is playing out. So thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Locke.
Will the study actually examine at what point an inmate begins to participate in this program during the incarceration? Is it at the beginning of incarceration, in the middle, toward the end? At what point?
Madam Vice Chair, that great question. Yes, we will be looking at when they start to get involved in the programs. I think that's a very important question. And so, yeah, we'll have some commentary on that.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up.
Delegate Herring.
And I think the senator is connecting the dots where I was going. My concern is that if a juvenile is eventually advanced to another correctional facility, no longer a juvenile, a gap. And so if you're going to look at that, I just want to make sure that there's no gap and that there is a continuing of education if they're starting and then they're moved to another adult facility, that is continuing and that we're not losing.
Delegate Herring, totally understand. We'll definitely look into that. I think that's important. Looking at, for that population, is there a gap? So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Senator McDougal.
Are we only looking at people that are in DOC, or we also included people that are DOC responsible and still in local jails?
Senator McDougal, another great question. We're looking at both because you've got the state responsible inmates, some of whom are in the jail facilities, and some of whom are in DOC facilities. Now, majority are in the DOC facilities, but we don't want to forget about those who are in the jail facilities. And so as part of that examination of what's available in the jails, also looking at whether state responsible inmates are able to participate in those programs as well. So.
Mr. Chairman, I noticed on slide 37, it says it's a 2004 report, but it's talking about individuals released from DOC in 2019, and then 3-year reincarceration rates from 2019, which I guess would have taken us to 22, which was 3 years ago from now. So that seems a little old. And then the second question, so is there newer data? And then the second question is, when they say reincarceration, does that mean convicted of a new felony offense, back in DOC or back in any correctional facility, including local jails?
Senator McDougall, great questions. So that FY 2019 releases, we are actively working. I've been working very hard over the past couple weeks to see what more recent data we can have, because we want to know that the data that we're seeing is reflective of actual programming that's happening today, because that's reflective of programming back in 2019 when a lot has changed since then. So we are actively working on that. And so, yes, that's on our radar. That is what is available through DOC publicly right now. And so we just wanted to provide that. And so certainly that's not to show kind of current, but just to give you a sense of what data we do have, what we see, but we're on it in terms of getting more recent data, both on the employment side and recidivism side. So we'll provide the most recent data that we can get. And I'm optimistic that we'll have some very recent data based on my conversations with DOC staff. And then in terms of reincarceration versus reconviction, that would be actually reincarcerated in a DOC facility. There's different measures: the rearrest, reconviction, reincarceration. So that's they're back in a DOC facility, but we will look at the other two measures of rearrests and reconvictions as well to see. So,
thank you, Mr.
Are you in the local and regional jails? Are you looking at only the state responsible prisoners that are in there, but the folks that are serving a 6-month, 8-month, 11-month sentence?
Mr. Chairman, we're looking at both. It's just what's available. I think what we'd like to do is provide you with information of what's going on, and also some considerations where it may not be practical or feasible to provide it for some. I believe just over a majority are pretrial, and they may not be there long enough to benefit as much as someone who's there for maybe a year or 2 or 3. So. But
isn't it true that that's where we have a high recidivism rate compared to our DOC, which has a relatively low recidivism rate? Is that generally true?
Mr. Chairman, based on the data that's been published so far, yes. We will also hopefully have more recent data on that to validate that. But
so even though we have less time to deal with someone in a local jail, it's really important that they get something there, because we need to cut that recidivism rate, do we not?
Mr. Chairman, I think what we'll do too is look at what other states are doing.
Okay.
And I think that can be informative in terms of the path forward, potentially, that we could consider.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody else? Thank you so much, Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good luck as you proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn it over to Mark Gribben.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Mark Gribben, and I'll be leading up our study of the effects of gun violence on Virginia communities. Our study resolution directs us to examine the impacts of firearm-related violence on the physical, mental, and emotional health of individuals in affected communities, as well as the broader social and economic impacts. It directs JLARC to consider and propose policy recommendations to address both gun violence and its effects. As I'm sure you know, Virginia, like other states around the country, experienced an increase in firearm-related violence over the last several years, including a 20% increase in homicides. While that rate is currently declining from its peak a couple of years ago, Virginia did have the 22nd highest rate of firearm-related homicides in 2023. While Virginia's homicide rate as a whole was about average for the nation, several Virginia localities did have relatively high homicide rates. The localities with the most firearm-related homicides by number and rate include the cities of Richmond, Portsmouth, Petersburg, Norfolk, and Roanoke. Several state agencies have initiatives or responsibilities related to firearm violence. For example, the DCJS Office of Safer Communities was established in the 2023 budget. The office oversees several grant programs intended to reduce violence through different types of programs, from violence interruption to after-school programs to providing additional resources for law enforcement. The OAG is also running its own Ceasefire Virginia program, which looks to reduce gun violence through improved investigation and prosecution of major crimes. The Departments of Health and State Police also collect extensive data on firearm-related deaths, injuries, and crimes. Looking at the code, Virginia criminal laws provide punishments for violent crimes in general, such as murder and robbery involving a weapon, and for gun crimes in specific, such as illegal sale or possession. Virginia laws also contain provisions related to the legal acquisition, ownership, and possession of firearms. This study will look broadly at the effects of firearm-related violence with a focus on community violence or violence that takes place in public spaces, with less emphasis on domestic violence or self-harm. First, we'll look at the trends and current prevalence of firearm-related violence, specifically community violence. Next, we'll look at the specific physical, mental, emotional, economic, and social impacts of exposure to firearm-related violence on individuals and their communities. And finally, we'll examine if there are programs, policies, and laws that have been effective at preventing, reducing, or addressing the effects of firearm-related violence. And we'll also look at the extent to which they're being used in Virginia. Our research methods will be fairly heavy on data analysis. I won't get into everything listed here, but we'll be performing extensive analysis of data on firearm-related deaths, injuries, and crimes. We'll also be drawing on data about healthcare costs, mental health impacts, K-12 impacts, and indicators of economic and social health. Law enforcement will be a critical resource for understanding community violence, so we'll be surveying police chiefs in selected cities and counties. Interviews will be another major resource, and we plan to talk with researchers, state agencies, and other subject matter experts. However, we expect a lot of the work will be at the locality level. Namely, we plan to go into localities with high rates of firearm-related violence and conduct extensive interviews with local government, police, nonprofits, and community leaders. Those discussions will focus on the challenges these communities face, how they are affected by violence, and what is and can be done to help address the issue. Finally, we'll draw on the existing research literature on firearm-related violence and its effects. For example, there's a good bit of literature on healthcare costs. We'll also be looking at what the research says about different programs, policies, and practices. For example, there's some good resources on what community-level programs have been shown to be effective at reducing violence. Mr. Chair, I'll pause here and if you have any questions.
Okay. Any questions? Senator McDougall?
Mr. Chair, will there be an analysis of how many people had a firearms-related offense prior to being charged with a firearms-related fatality or other firearms-related offense?
Senator, I think we can make sure that we look into that. I believe the data allows us to do that. Yes, maybe. To the extent that the data allows, we'll be looking into that.
Okay, truthful answer there.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
And second piece, can we have analysis of people who committed firearms-related offenses if they've committed any other offense prior to that firearms-related offense?
Senator, I think it's going to depend a lot on what the data allows us to do and if we can make those types of linkages. But we are looking sort of at the larger connection of criminal activity to the use of firearms in crimes.
Mr. Chairman, I would just say I think a number of the other things are important to look at as well, but I do think if we don't have the ability to determine if the firearms-related offenses were committed by somebody who had already been charged with or convicted of a criminal offense, it'll make that data less valuable in the conversation.
Senator, I think when we look at the homicide data, I believe there is a lot more on that, so we may be able to do a better job of linking that up when it comes to homicides in particular, but for other crimes that may not be as easy to do.
Thank you. Senator Locke?
As you are examining the programs, policies, and laws, will that include the OAG ceasefire, Virginia, and the Safer Communities programs?
Senator, we are looking at OAG ceasefire. We're also looking at Safer Communities out of DCJS, as well. There's two other programs there. They have their own ceasefire program, which they provide grant funding to localities, and they also have the Firearm Violence and Intervention Prevention Program grants. So we're working with DCJS. We're working through the Safer Communities program coordinators to kind of understand what is going on at the local level. All those programs, as you know, Senator, are very early on, so we're not trying to evaluate how good of a job they are doing necessarily. We're more trying to understand what work they're doing and what could be done to help them in that work, as well as what they're planning to do as they put these programs in place for evaluating success. But again, because those programs are so early on, I wouldn't say that we're evaluating whether or not those programs are quote unquote doing a good job or not.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman.
Simon.
Following up actually on both of those points, I think one of the things that'd be useful for us to hear about is if there are some data deserts or some places where you're not finding data that would be helpful to use, that would be good for us to know, because I think some of that we could start tracking, or we could mandate that folks start keep some of the data. So if there's data that would have been helpful that doesn't exist, I think one of the recommendations might be that, hey, General Assembly, you guys can sort of require or work on helping you guys to improve that so that we have better data to look at and to study. And then I guess also in the Operation Ceasefire and the different places, I may not be in a position to say whether it's working or not, but I think it'd be useful to sort of get a breakdown on how those funds are being spent, what they're being spent on, whether they're being spent on evidence-based items or they're being spent on billboards and TV commercials or what. So to the extent you can help us understand where that money's going, I think it'd be useful too.
Doug, we can do that.
Okay, Senator McDougall.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Delegate Simon that if some of these items that we're asking for, if the data is not there, then we need to know so we can make sure that for future reviews it is there. But there's conversations around the state that in certain jurisdictions, gun crimes are prosecuted very differently. Is there going to be any analysis of how gun violence relates to how a particular jurisdiction handles the prosecution of those gun crimes?
Senator, that has come up in some of our early conversations, so that is something that's definitely on our radar. I can't tell you how far we're going to go with that, but that's something that has definitely been brought to our attention that is on the sheet.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I would expect you will receive some questions specifically about a couple jurisdictions when you come forward, so I hope you are able to ascertain that.
Yes, Senator, we'll be talking with, for sure, law enforcement as well as Commonwealth attorneys, and we'll be getting those local perspectives as part of our research.
Okay, terrific. Everybody's happy then. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will turn it over to Kimberly Sarte.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Kimberly.
I'm Kimberly Sarte, and I'm JLARC's third Associate Director. The work under my supervision this year includes the ongoing evaluation and oversight that JLARC provides for the General Assembly, and also the fiscal analysis services that we provide. I would now like to introduce Ellen Miller, who is a project leader for our evaluations of economic development incentives.
Welcome. Everybody gets to talk today.
Yes, and I'll be very brief. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Ellen Miller, and I'm our lead for our evaluation of economic development incentives. This year, I'll be providing 2 reports to you all. The first one in June, and that one will cover our evaluation of workforce-related incentives like the VGIP program and the custom workforce program that VEDP administers, and also several relatively small sales tax exemptions for specific industries. And then in November, I'll provide to you a report of our annual incentives report that includes high-level information on spending trends and performance trends over a 10-year period. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm done. Told you I'd be quick. I'd be glad to take any questions.
No, a lot of people ask about those things, so I'm glad we're keeping up with it.
All right, I'll turn the podium over to Alex Jansen.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning.
Members, my name is Alex Jansen, and I work with JLARC's ongoing oversight for the Virginia Retirement System, Commonwealth Savers, and the Virginia Information Technology Agency. In terms of JLARC's ongoing oversight of the retirement system, each year we give 2 reports on the system's investments, funding, defined contribution plans, and other topics related to benefits and administration. We'll give the first of these semi-annual updates at the July meeting. In July, you will also hear from the VRS Director's designee and the Chief Investment Officer, who will provide their annual status reports. And then we'll have another VRS update for you at the December meeting. And as part of that update, we will have a more in-depth look at the defined contribution portion of the hybrid retirement plan. JLARC also has oversight of the Commonwealth Savers Plan, formerly Virginia 529, on an ongoing basis. Every 4 years, we contract with an actuarial firm to conduct an independent audit of the Commonwealth Savers Defined Benefit College Savings Program. You'll hear at the July meeting from our independent actuary the results of this quadrennial audit. Also at the July meeting, you'll hear from the Commonwealth Savers CEO and investment director who will provide their annual status reports. We continue to monitor VITA on an ongoing basis, and in the fall, we'll have a brief update for you when you will also hear from their Chief Information Officer. Mr. Chair, I will pause for any questions.
Anybody have questions? Well, thank you very much.
And with that, I will turn it over to Kimberly Sarte.
Good luck.
Thank you, Alex. Mr. Chairman, I will briefly touch on the other items under my supervision. For several years now, JLARC has been providing racial and ethnic impact statements, which assess the impact on racial and ethnic disparities that could be created by proposed criminal justice legislation. And these can be requested by the House or Senate Courts of Justice chairs. This past session, we completed one racial and ethnic impact statement, and it was for a bill that would have modified provisions under which law enforcement officers could stop motor vehicles. JLARC also provides a number of fiscal analysis services for the General Assembly. We provide several annual reports related to the state's finances, which are listed here. And Ellen Miller leads our efforts on the state spending reports, and Kate Hopkins has recently led our efforts on the Virginia Compared to Other States brochure. We also provide fiscal impact reviews. The most common are the second opinions on the fiscal impact of proposed legislation that we provide during the session, and these must be requested by the chair of the committee where the bill resides. However, this past session, we did not receive any requests for fiscal impact reviews, even though we heard rumblings of a couple that may be coming our way, but none actually showed up. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions about JLARC's oversight or fiscal analysis responsibilities that you or any other members may have.
Okay, terrific. Do we have any questions? These are very, very important, and now we all know for sure that we can ask you for a second opinion. I'm not sure you advertise that widely because we hear complaints so much about those fiscal statements. Yeah, okay.
But we're available should there be any requests ever. I said we're available if there's requests.
All right, we heard that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, this slide shows the calendar for the year. We're going to meet in June and in July. There'll be no meeting in August. We'll also meet in October, November, and December, where the bulk of our work will be presented. We're still in the process of determining whether a September meeting is needed.
Okay.
In terms of future work, there were 2 study resolutions that were passed during the 25 session, one to evaluate the allocation of judicial resources, which we plan to conduct in 26. And there was a resolution directing JLARC to evaluate funding for coastal zone risk management studies, which we're required to complete by 2028. That does leave substantial capacity for additional work for the 26 calendar year to be directed by this commission. I will work with you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Locke, and Delegate Simon, who chairs the Study Topic Selection Subcommittee, to schedule a meeting of the subcommittee later this year. That concludes the presentation of the work plan. I'd be glad to take any additional questions you have about it.
Are there any overall questions? Senator Eben.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought that at one point we talked about possibly adding some, for lack of a better term, mini studies, things that could be reviewed. And I'm just wondering, am I remembering correctly, did we ever discuss reviewing the state's medical cannabis program this year? That's not something we discussed this year, or did we?
I mentioned briefly coming up at one point, but it was not ultimately was not a decision to discuss it to review it this year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the year's work plan.
Second.
It's been moved by Senator Eben and seconded by Senator Locke that we approve the work plan for 2025. Is this a voice vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Well, thank you so much. We're looking forward to a very productive year. Lots of good topics.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the agenda is the biennial report to the General Assembly entitled JLARC Impacts. You have the report in your packet. There it is. JLARC staff is required by statute to report at least every 2 years on actions taken in response to prior reports and recommendations, and to bring before you matters that we believe may require further legislative attention. The presentation is broken into 2 parts. First, actions taken based on JLARC recommendations, and then second, further opportunities for action by agencies or the General Assembly. I'm going to discuss action taken on JLARC recommendations in 2 different ways. First, measured in aggregate. These aggregate measures provide for an overall assessment, and we use these measures as a way to assess our performance as a staff. Then I'll briefly highlight some of the specific actions that have been taken in response to recent JLARC reports. One of the key measures of performance is simply the percentage of recommendations that have been implemented from JLARC studies. As you can see, just over half of the recommendations over the last 4 years have been implemented either in whole or in part. Another way to measure actions taken in staff performance is how many bills and budget amendments have been introduced to implement JLARC recommendations. During the last 2 sessions combined, over 100 bills and over 100 budget amendments have been introduced. These numbers continue to grow and are substantially larger than we reported in 23. A final performance measure I'll mention is how much in savings has resulted from JLARC recommendations. There was only a small amount of savings from the prior 2 fiscal years, which resulted from VITA replacing contractors with classified staff. But we do believe there will be more significant future savings resulting from proactively funding bridge maintenance and elimination of the angel investor tax credit. Mr. Chairman, I'll now briefly discuss some of the specific actions that have been taken in response to recommendations. These include legislative and agency actions, and it should be noted that the slides highlight only some of the actions taken. There is comprehensive discussion of the actions taken in the written impacts report. From the SOQ report, you've provided substantially more funding for support positions in schools, improved the formula for allocation of funds to at-risk youth, and provided additional student-based special education funding. From the Psychiatric Hospitals report, you've enacted legislation expressly authorizing the Commissioner of Health to condition the issuance of certificates of public need to private hospitals on these hospitals accepting patients that have been issued temporary detention orders. You've authorized longer shifts for nurses and increased compensation for hard-to-fill positions. And DBHDS has developed a process for ensuring that private hospitals are meeting the temporary detention order commitments in certificates of public need. For court-appointed criminal defense attorneys, you've raised the caps on pay and you've better aligned the pay categories with their workloads. Based on the self-sufficiency report, the Department of Social Services has taken steps to strengthen the management of the VIEW TANF program. You took action to reduce potential abuse of the child care subsidy by limiting the amount of time one is eligible for the subsidy while engaged in a job search. The Go Virginia Board and Department of Housing and Community Development took action to improve the eligibility requirements for projects as well as the evaluation of them. And finally, you provided for critical additional internal audit positions at the Department of Health. There do remain, Mr. Chairman, some opportunities for further worthwhile action based on JLARC recommendations. I'll briefly describe some of them. And as with actions taken, I'm only going to highlight some opportunities for action. A comprehensive discussion of them is contained in the written impacts report. The SOQ funding report contained additional recommendations that could be acted upon in the near term that would further improve the funding formula. With regard to psychiatric hospitals, opportunities for additional action include preventing TDOs and civil commitments of certain persons with dementia and developmental disabilities, giving state hospitals the authority to deny and limit admissions as appropriate, and alleviating at least some of the significant pressure on state hospitals and law enforcement by increasing utilization of state-licensed private hospitals to treat patients who are under TDOs or have been civilly committed. From the data center study, we believe there's real value in clarifying in the code that electric utilities have the authority to delay serving new customers because of transmission or generation capacity limitations. We found there to be uncertainty among at least some key stakeholders regarding this authority under current law. And it would be valuable to have Dominion develop a plan for how it would address the risk that costs associated with potential overconstruction of transmission or generation infrastructure will be incurred by existing customers. We continue to believe that struggling schools could greatly benefit from more instructional assistance, And from the recent study of the Department of Health, there's the opportunity to help ensure the department has the leadership it needs over the long term by adding qualification requirements for future commissioners and codifying the chief operating officer position to ensure its continued existence in future administrations. Further, additional HR positions at the department would be of significant assistance to the agency given the recruitment challenges it faces. While you've already enacted significant legislation from the guardianship study, there remain several measures that could be taken to help reduce the financial vulnerability of persons under guardianship by strengthening the requirements for conservators. From the CSB study, DMAS needs to do more to help standardize Medicaid billing and reimbursement and help CSBs take better advantage of preferred provider programs so that the state can maximize the use of Medicaid to pay for CSB services. And finally, the Department of Education could ease a significant burden on child care providers by basing reimbursement on enrollment and not attendance. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions anyone has about the impacts report.
Delegate Tatum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to slide 3 and 4 and being a newer member on JLARC, is that about standard performance, or is that better or worse than years prior?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, on slide 3, that is a little bit lower than the last two periods. It was, I think, 68% last time around implementation, and the time before about 77%. So it has declined some. I took a look back at it, and there are a variety of reasons and explanations, and each study has its own set of factors and dynamics. And so I didn't feel like there's a real universal trend or explanation for why it's down, but it is down some. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you for that update.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's customary for the Auditor of Public Accounts to present their work plan for the coming year to JLARC for approval, and I'll introduce Stacey Henshaw and her staff who will present it now. Stacey?
Congratulations on being reelected.
Oh, thank you.
Looking forward to some more great work.
We look forward to doing it for you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I'm Stacey Henshaw, the Auditor of Public Accounts, and Eric Sandridge, my Deputy Auditor for Technology and Innovation, will be assisting me today in the presentation. Today we'll be presenting our work plan for the upcoming year and providing an updated salary scales that both require Commission approval. And these are items that we typically ask you to do every year. But as Hal mentioned earlier, this year we'll also be discussing the potential relocation of our office from the James Monroe building to private lease space and requesting approval to enter into that lease. We will be providing an update on the results of our prior year work plan at next month's meeting. Before we get started today, I wanted to communicate a change in our leadership team. Our former Deputy for Human Capital and Operations accepted a position at one of our Commonwealth's higher education institutions earlier this year. So she stayed in state government, and so we were happy about that. And so as a result, we had a vacancy on our team, and we went through a formal recruitment process to fill that vacancy. And I'm pleased to introduce Zach Borgerding as our new Deputy for Human Capital and Operations, and he is right there in our audience.
Welcome. Congratulations. I thank you.
Zach has a wealth of experience auditing for the Commonwealth. He's been with our office for 17 years, and he's managed some of our largest and most complex audits. And so we look forward to having him serve in his new capacity. Moving on to our work plan. As you know, our work plan doesn't change a whole lot from year to year, and that's because most of what we do is mandated. And so the focus of the work that we perform is audits that allow us to provide assurance over the Commonwealth's financial statements, which is the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, or the ACFR. As well as the audit of federal funds that the Commonwealth receives, and that's called our single audit, and then our audits of the higher education institution financial statements. And so those are the main drivers of what we do. It's the bulk of our work plan. And who we audit doesn't vary a lot from year to year, but there can be some variation in what we audit at those entities. And after we perform our mandatory work, we use a risk-based approach for determining what remaining work to do in the Commonwealth. Right now, we don't have a whole lot of risk-based projects in our work plan, but we do have some of those. We're going to go through this very quickly today. There is a work plan report in your materials, and so if there's any information that we're not covering or that you want to ask questions about related to a specific agency, you can please use that report to get additional information. For the coming year, we're proposing just under 150,000 hours in our work plan, and this is a slight increase from the prior year. And there's really no one driver for that. It's spread out among multiple projects and functions. We also have just under 6,000 hours proposed for our audit support projects, and these are projects that don't directly impact the audits that we perform, but are indirect projects such as providing audit tools, doing risk analysis, managing a quality assurance program that we're required to do by the standards. And it also includes our internship program. And the decrease that you see there is because we've changed how we're budgeting our internship program this year. So some hours are in audit projects, and then some hours are in audit support projects. This next slide summarizes the work that we're doing by function, and I'll mention two areas here and the rest that we're going to cover on subsequent slides. The independent agencies and authorities is the time that we spend auditing the Virginia Retirement System, Commonwealth Savers, Lottery, and ABC, and we audit financial statements for them. And there are also a few smaller other agencies and authorities in there as well. And that time that you see there, the budget that we have for those entities hasn't changed a whole lot from the prior year. It's pretty consistent. And the other area is special projects. And that, if you were to compare last year and this year, it would look like that's gone down. But what we did is we took some of the things that we had in special projects and we've moved them into functional areas that they relate to. For example, we used to have fiscal distress in special projects, and we've now moved that in with our other local government related projects. And the bulk of the time that's left for special projects is the time that we spend maintaining Commonwealth Data Point, which is the Commonwealth's public-facing transparency website. So the first area that I'm going to cover today is the work that we do over local governments, local constitutional officers, and the Commonwealth's judicial system. The first few lines that you see here, our comparative report, our fiscal distress analysis and monitoring, and inquiries, guidelines, and quality reviews all deal with the work that we do in the local government area. We're going to spend a lot of time next month talking about our local government comparative report and fiscal distress monitoring, and so I'm not going to cover it a lot here. We do think those are two things that are vital to the Commonwealth. Probably the most inquiries that we get in our office are related to those two functions. Even though it's a relatively small portion of our work plan, there's obviously a lot of interest, and we field a lot of questions and provide a lot of information to people in that area. The other area that I'm going to briefly cover is the work that we do over the Commonwealth's judicial system. And we audit the district courts and magistrates and general receivers annually. So we go in there and we look at financial controls. We also audit the circuit court clerks, and we have to go to all of them at least once every 2 years. And once again, we're looking at financial activity and making sure there are good controls over their financial activities. That's another area that we receive a whole lot of questions about, and a lot of times it's more about the operations of the court and not necessarily their financial activity. And so once again, we spend a lot of time fielding questions and trying to direct individuals in the right, to the right entity to help them. By far, the bulk of our work plan is over executive branch agencies. It's over 80% of the work that we do. Those hours are pretty consistent with the prior year. They're a little higher. Once again, no large driver there. It's spread out in different areas. Eric's going to talk about higher education institutions. For the remaining secretariats that are listed here, any changes that you see would be primarily with federal programs that are going in and out of cycle, and so we have to audit them on a cyclical basis. With the exception of higher ed, most of the hours that are budgeted here are for us to audit the business cycles that are significant to the Commonwealth's financial statements or have major federal programs in cycle. The other thing that I will mention briefly here is that when we go into an agency, we don't necessarily cover everything at that agency. We're covering the work that is significant to the Commonwealth's financial statements or federal programs that we're required to audit for to satisfy requirements from the federal government. And so we've been concerned that, you know, there are a lot of things sometimes that are left at agencies that we're not able to cover. And so we've been looking at ways to be able to better cover all the activity. And so this year we're piloting a program where we'll do an internal control questionnaire review to allow us to get in and get a picture of how well they're doing in other areas besides the areas that we come and look at every year for the ACFR. And so we're piloting that at DMAS, at Behavioral Health, and the Department of Corrections. If we're hoping that we'll be successful in that pilot and start spreading that out to the other agencies as well. And so that will be more of a risk-based project that we'll be doing. I know each year I get up here and I say we audit the financial statements and we audit federal. And so this year I thought I would just briefly tell you what that means. For those of you who haven't seen a copy or flipped through our financial statements, that's a copy of it up there on the screen. And it's 370 pages. I know it probably sounds like that we say, oh, we audit financial statements. It takes a lot of time. And it's because it's 370 pages and we basically have to provide some level of assurance on almost everything that's in those financial statements. We go to 25 different agencies and institutions to audit that activity. We have a December 15th deadline. That's a statutory deadline. And basically the goal of the work that we're doing is to be able to issue what we call an opinion on whether or not the Commonwealth has accurately presented its financial statements in accordance with accounting standards and whether or not they have good controls over their financial activity. And so just to provide an example, we go in and we look at the investments the Commonwealth has and whether they're valued correctly, whether they've disclosed the risk associated with those investments correctly. We also audit capital assets. The primary capital asset for the Commonwealth is its roads and bridges, its infrastructure. And so we have to make sure they're valued correctly in the financial statements. We also spend a lot of time on debt. And so are bonds reported correctly in the financial statements? Are all the leases there? Are pensions accurately reported? And then the other area that we cover a lot as well is controls over information system security. And so does the Commonwealth have good controls over its financial systems? And are they following VITA's guidelines? So this next slide here is related to the work we do over single audit. And so I've already mentioned that we focus on major federal programs, and these are the larger programs that the Commonwealth, for which the Commonwealth receives funding. And we have to audit them once every 3 years. So a Medicaid or TANF, those funds have to come into the cycle at least once every 3 years. We always have to do work over Medicaid because it's such a large driver, so from a financial statement perspective. But we also have to pull in risk-based programs, and so we have some of those that we pull in every year. And so the objective of this report is to issue an opinion on whether or not the Commonwealth complied with federal rules and regulations with their major programs and whether or not they have good internal controls over those programs. The programs that we audit, like I said, vary from year to year. We have 26 we're auditing for the upcoming year, and they'll be at 16 different agencies. And there is a lot of overlap with our ACFR agencies. Because we choose as an office to include the internal control report for the Commonwealth's financial statements, we bundle that with our single audit, so with the reports for our federal work. We have to complete that work within 60 days of the time that we audit the financial statements, and so hence the February 13th deadline. February 14th is a really happy day for us in our office, and so we always, hence the celebration that you see, it is a very intense period for our staff to meet those two deadlines, and so when we get through that time period, we can have a little bit of a sigh of relief that we've made it through those two big projects that are very important to the Commonwealth. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Eric to wrap up our discussion on the work plan.
Thank you, Stacy. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as Stacy mentioned, my name is Eric Sandridge. I'm Deputy Auditor for Technology and Innovation at the APA. As Stacy pointed out earlier, higher ed is a big part of our work plan. It represents about 50% of the executive branch for us, also about 40% of our overall work plan hours. This is typically financial statement audits at most of our higher education institutions, so the audit objectives look very similar to the Commonwealth's financial statements as a whole. However, we have other miscellaneous activities, agreed upon procedures related to NCAA programs, federal work related to financial aid and research and development. We also do internal control questionnaires at our community college system. So there are a variety of different things that happen here. It also includes some hours for our higher education comparative report. This is a ratio analysis that we do of all of our four-year institutions of higher education, looking at whether they have the appropriate financial resources relative to established benchmarks. We did share that data with JLARC last fall when they were doing their study on higher education. Our cycled agency bucket is comparatively much smaller. There is no mandatory annual audit requirement for these agencies. They tend not to be financially significant to the Commonwealth's financial statements or our single audit of federal funds. So typically we divide these agencies into two risk pools, a low risk and high risk pool. There hasn't been a lot of change here in terms of the pools. However, we did add some hours this year for our first review of the Opioid Abatement Authority, and we picked up one extra audit in the high risk pool as well. Turning away from our work plan to some administrative items that Stacy mentioned previously, JLARC, the Code of Virginia authorizes JLARC to approve our salary scales each year. What we've done here is, on the next slide, recommended an increase to our salary scales of the 3% that was approved in Chapter 2 of the 2024 Acts of Assembly. In addition, I just wanted to outline that throughout the year, we operate a performance-based compensation program for our staff. So we're looking for exceptional performance on projects, also passing professional exams and to promote retention. So we do award bonuses for that. We also will award promotions and in-band salary adjustments in alignment with our compensation plan and budget as staff progress through our organization.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
Do you have many openings? Is it hard for you to fill these spots?
It's a great question. I would say right now we're at about 115 people. Our maximum employment level is 136. This has been about the same for several years. We usually ramp up our recruiting season. So we're going to bring on 10 new college grads in June. That's pretty typical. So we'll be at about 125 along with 6 interns. Recruiting is pretty competitive. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide or so, but it is challenging to find new college grads in accounting. The numbers have been down for years now, and that's been a pipeline issue that the national organizations, state organizations have all been working to try to solve, and there have been some changes in code related to that to make it easier for folks to move into the accounting profession and ultimately become CPAs, which we appreciate because it makes it easier for us.
Can you tell us what that was?
So there's been a change, and Virginia was one of the first to adopt it, to allow for a new pathway to become a CPA. So previously you had to have 150 hours, credit hours, which was seen as perhaps an impediment to becoming a CPA. And so now there's an alternate pathway where you have additional experience requirement without having the 150-hour requirement. And so we're hopeful that will prove fruitful.
When you hire a new college grad, is it the goal to eventually them to be able to pass a CPA?
Certainly, we want to maintain as many CPAs in our office as we can. It's not in the cards for everybody necessarily. Not everyone in our office becomes a CPA. We try to encourage all those that desire to be a CPA to be a CPA. It does come with a salary increase in our office, and so there are economic incentives to do that as well as professional growth incentives because it opens up a lot of possibilities if you are a CPA as opposed to not one. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, okay. This slide just shows our salary scales with that 3% increase. The 4 buckets have not changed. As I mentioned, our maximum employment level stayed at 136. That has not changed either. We are going to review 2 more administrative items that we may present to you depending on what we find out from this. One is to do Continued evaluation of market-based compensation in our office. Are our salary scales appropriate at every level within our organization to make sure that we can retain and recruit and attract folks to our agency to do the important work that we do? The other thing that we're looking at this year that we haven't examined in roughly 25 years or so is does our current billing model accurately reflect what our agencies are doing and how they're operating? Generally speaking, we don't bill for general funded agencies because we're a general funded agency. But there are some organizations where funding has shifted over time, or maybe they're not general funded at all and we're not billing for them. And so we do want to analyze that. Is that appropriate? Should we be billing for some of these things that are not being funded?
Like the DMV or VEC?
So we have organizations like the higher eds. We don't bill for their NCAA work. So athletics, technically that's being funded via our general funds because we're not billing for that. We have the Virginia Biotechnology Research Partnership Authority. Originally, its only lease was with the Commonwealth, so we didn't bill. Now that's not the case. So, should we be billing that organization? So just trying to look at how things have changed over time and make sure those arrangements still hold like they did. So with that, I would like to stop here and before I turn it back over to Stacy to talk about our office relocation and request approval of our 2026 work plan, as well as that 3% increase in salary scales to reflect Chapter 2.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Do we need a motion now, or Stacy, are you coming back? I am. Okay. I think that'd be appropriate, unless anyone wants to make a motion now. Okay, good.
We can just have a lot of motions to cover. We'll cover them all at the end. Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the items today that we're coming before you about is a non-recurring request. Our office is located in the James Monroe Building. As far as we know, we're the only legislative agency there. Been there for 40 years and our space has not been renovated in 40 years. So it's really showing its age right now. And so as you all are aware, there is the plan to decommission the James Monroe Building. And so we need a home. And DGS has been overseeing this process, and we've been working closely with them. And at this time, they haven't identified any state space for our office to be relocated. And the reason I'm bringing this before you today is because we've been working with them on looking at private space to lease. And we reached out to the Money Committee staff because ultimately, because I'm a legislative agency, the lease would be for our agency specific versus a DGS lease, which is different than what will happen for executive branch entities that go into private space. And so obviously that's not something I've had to do before. We haven't moved in 40-some years. And before I incurred a debt for the Commonwealth, I wanted to make sure it was okay for me to do that. And so in terms of a lease. And so we reached out to the Money Committee staff, and we talked about it. And we've been sharing data with them all along. And Senate Finance and Appropriation staff suggested that since JLARC is our oversight entity, that they believe that we should request that you grant me authority to enter into a lease. At this time, DGS is still managing the whole process for us. They've been the ones that have been providing information to us on potential leases. They also have a requirement to go before the six-pack and provide, it's in the budget, and provide a relocation plan and cost data to the six-pack for approval, and all of the information related to APA and where they're planning for us to go and costs associated with that would be part of that approval process as well. The only difference would be I have to enter my own lease as a legislative agency, and they're covering things for the executive branch. And so it still goes through the control process that the General Assembly has put into place regarding the relocation of agencies in that building. And so there is anticipated that there will be a budget increase for our agency, and DGS has communicated, I think there's $35 million that's in the budget for relocation, not for us, for everybody in the building, and that there is funds that have been set aside for the APA, and anything that is not covered by that, we anticipate that we can use our special revenue fund to help cover the difference on that potential issue. And so like I said, at this time, and I believe the Six Packs meeting next week, where they'll have some discussion about relocation plans. But at this time, we would like to, this will be another thing that we're asking for is authorization for us to enter into space for our office space.
Is it your intention to stay in downtown Richmond?
So it is. We would be in the downtown Richmond area. And we did ask, obviously our goal is to move back into state space. And so we've asked about that. And I think right now they haven't necessarily identified a space, but said there will be a lot of opportunities either in the new building or in a renovated space eventually once they start moving everybody around. And so I know they have transition space that they'll be using for some, and so the thought is that they would be able to get us back into that space at some point in time.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess for clarification, are we voting on the three?
Well, we don't have a motion before us yet, but you could make a motion to give them permission to enter into a lease for office space if you wanted to.
Okay, that we're going to do them by the piece.
Pardon me?
We're going to do them, excuse me, individually. So this is the first.
Yeah, I think we need to vote on this separately.
All right, so I'll make the motion.
Second.
Okay. So we have a motion before us to authorize the Ms. Henshaw to enter into a lease on behalf of her legislative agency for office space in Richmond.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Speaking to the motion.
Sure.
I guess appreciate the presentation and information in this regards. We've had a good amount of discussion over the last couple of years in regards to agencies not being in downtown. So I appreciate your consideration of that and staying downtown and not divesting from downtown Richmond. And one would assume Six-Pack will be aligning with you in terms of the duration of that lease to then coincide with whether it's the new building, the VDOT annex, or one of the other available assets theoretically in the next 5 years.
Yes.
5 to 10 year window. So
from what we understand, any lease that we enter into, there would be the ability to exit that lease. And I think the term that what DGS recommended to us is after 6 years. And so I think that's the time period that they're thinking it'll take to have a space available for us. So we've been assured that that would be built into the lease that we would have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions on the motion? Okay, we have a motion before us. I guess it's another, we've had a motion and someone seconded. I think Delegate Simon seconded it, and it's another voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? For the record, it was unanimous vote. Okay, thank you. Now we have another item, the work plan. Any questions on the work plan, any discussion on the work plan before somebody offers a motion to approve the work plan we just heard about?
Move to approve the work plan.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Delegate Simon and seconded by Senator Locke to approve the work plan for the Auditor of Public Accounts. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, your work plan passes unanimously. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. You have anything else?
One more, salary scales.
The salaries. Okay.
That's important.
I know. So no one's going to offer a cut on our. We already put this in the budget for 3%. So it's not like it's more money, right? It's the money's there. Yes, sir. Delegate Wilt.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarification on the slide, page 16. So those salary figures. That's kind of like for the first deputy auditor. The 123, that's kind of like the beginning, and then entry level, and then the 238's the top number. We're talking about 3% on each end.
Right, and it all depends on who's coming in and where they are when they're coming in, and so yes, it's a range of salary amounts. But like Eric said, this hasn't been really changed the whole scale and how we've have it organized in 25 years. So we do know that there's some oddity there in terms of, our audit staff start as staff and then they move up into auditor. And so we are looking at whether or not we could change it to be more reflective of the progression of staff in our office.
Stacey, is that you're able to hire people for $39,000 a year?
That $39,000 would be for our administrative staff.
Okay.
And so we are not able to hire audit staff for $38,000. And so our audit staff start kind of in the middle there. And so right now our starting salary is $56,000 for our audit staff. And we do know that's a little low in the area right now in terms of like Eric said,
sure.
Accountants are in high demand.
Sure. Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the salary scales for Auditor of Public Accounts. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So there you go. All
Thank
three
you.
are done.
Appreciate it.
Sure. Well, is that all your folks up there in that picture?
That is. We just recently had a meeting where we brought everyone in from across the state to the Science Museum, and that is a picture of all of us.
Oh, terrific. Well, tell them we all thank them for what they're doing.
So I appreciate
We value our employees.
I will definitely pass that along.
Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes the agenda. The next meeting is Wednesday, June 4th. It's a Wednesday meeting date. So, that's all we
Okay,
have.
terrific. Any questions for the director before we move to adjourn? Okay, let's all rise. Thank you.
Thanks.
We are adjourned.